Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening here at the Public Library. My name is Tracy Metz. I'm the director of the John Adams Institute, and I'm delighted that you're all here. We have a sort of triple-barreled evening this evening. We not only have our exciting guest speaker, Kim Wehle. Welcome, Kim. Yeah. You have a lot of fans already. Yeah, how cool is that? Yeah. But we also have a double host for this evening. This is the yearly Fulbright Commission John Adams Institute lecture. We're hosting this together. We've done this for many years now before the pandemic. Then it was quiet for a while, and we resumed after the pandemic. And I think I can say on behalf of my sort of co-director this evening, Christopher Gradenwitz, that I think we plan on keeping going, right? You in for it? Definitely. Good, I am too. So Kim is here as a Fulbright scholar, thanks to the Fulbright Commission. And she's also with us at the John Adams, and we have given her a nickname. We call her our thinker in residence. We've never had one of those before. Kim already gave a three-part course on the Constitution, on the Supreme Court, and a little bit about pardons, but this is the big evening talking about pardons. When she wrote her book on presidential pardons, I don't think she could have known how unbelievably topical this all would be, let alone her previous books about the Constitution and about the Supreme Court. I don't think anybody inside or outside the United States since 1776 has given this much thought to what the Constitution actually is and what it says and how much of it applies to the life that we lead now so many centuries later. So all her work is, well, just right on the money, very topical, and she is incredibly knowledgeable, and she's a wonderful storyteller. So I know for sure that you're going to have a delightful evening. Just a word about the run of show. I will give the floor in just a moment to Christopher Gradenwitz, the director of the Fulbright Commission, to do a word of welcome. Then I will introduce our moderator for this evening, Kenneth Manusama, whom many of you know already from his appearances on Subjects American all over the country, from his podcast, Amerikaanse Toestanden, and also as a moderator and speaker with us. And then we have a special event at the end of the evening. We'll be announcing the winner of our yearly essay prize contest called Beyond Academia. And I'll tell you more about that later. For now, I'd like to give the floor to Christopher.
Thank you, Tracy, for your kind introduction. Hello, everybody. My name is Christopher Gradenwitz. I'm the Executive Director of the Fulbright Commission the Netherlands. Welcome also on behalf of Fulbright. As Tracy said, the John Adams Institute and Fulbright co-organize one event each year. And we thought, is there a better idea for a joint event than inviting a US Fulbright scholar visiting the Netherlands? The Fulbright Commission the Netherlands selected Dr. Kim Wehle as one of our US Fulbright scholars. And Kim, we are delighted to have you here. Before saying a bit more on the research Dr. Wehle is doing at Leiden University on her Fulbright scholarship, I would like to take the opportunity to introduce Fulbright to those of you who are not familiar with it. Fulbright was founded in 1946, and ever since it has been the US government flagship program for international exchange in higher education. Fulbright offers scholarships to students and scholars who are selected on their merits. It does so in almost all countries. It is always a two-way street. US grantees will go to the other country, and there will be grantees coming from those countries who will go to the US, typically for 1 year. A defining feature of the Fulbright program is that it takes a binational approach. This means that Fulbright commissions are founded on a treaty between the US government and, in our case, the Dutch government. Both governments are the main sponsors, contributing about the same. We have also 6 US citizens on our board and 6 Dutch citizens. The US ambassador and the Dutch Minister of Education are our honorary chairs. It is in the almost 80 years of its existence, Fulbright has received bipartisan support in the US Congress. We will have to see in the near future how things will work out under the present administration. Right now, I can make 2 points to clarify as much as I can. First, our Dutch Commission pays out stipends itself. This means that once you are selected and you are on your Fulbright abroad, you can count on your grant. We have already communicated this to all our grantees, both in the US and here. And it's important to say this as the New York Times and other media reported on incidents where Fulbrighters did not receive their stipends any longer. These Fulbrighters were in exchanges with some other countries where payments are being administered by a US agency called the Institute of International Education, IIE. There was a pause of payments to and from IIE, only temporarily, as the payments have been resumed. And while this is extremely sad for those who were affected, it cannot happen to Fulbrighters going to and coming from the Netherlands. Second, while next week the board of the Fulbright Commission the Netherlands still has to meet and choose its position on if and how it could possibly respond to conditions imposed on Fulbright through some of the executive orders of the US President, I can only speak for myself. To my mind, academic freedom should be considered one of the hallmarks of Western society, as well as the backbone of the Fulbright program. The Fulbright program is maybe the best the US has to offer to the civilized world. It is worth fighting for while defending its cause. Its mission to promote mutual understanding between the citizens of the US and citizens of other countries is as alive as ever before. I would appeal to you that you inform students and scholars you know of who might be interested in receiving a Fulbright scholarship that we are there. These are challenging times, but also an important time to go to the other country and see for yourself what more it has to offer than you learn from the media. While transatlantic relations on the political level are under huge pressure, let's seek to bolster our ties between our civil societies through academic exchange. This brings me back to Kim. Dr. Wehle is here on a Fulbright scholarship to do research on how social constructivism informs constitutional law. She examines how citizens and non-citizens internalize constitutional values and analyzes whether and how that lens may be used to address democratic backsliding and authoritarian tendencies across legal and policy regimes. The Fulbright Commission wishes her well in conducting her research at Leiden, and we all are eager to learn from you, Kim, what you want to share with us on the topic of tonight's lecture, Pardon Power, Reforming the Sword of Justice.
Pardon me, I forgot something really important. While she's here, Kim is also affiliated with the University of Leiden, and she's teaching there every week, and her mentor, sponsor at the University of Leiden, who's a constitutional expert in his own enormous right, is with us here this evening. You all know him from TV, Wim Voermans. Wim, could you stand up? Yeah. So, thank you for being one of the moving parts of this whole event.
Thank you, Tracy and Chriswart. It is my pleasure to introduce the main attraction for this evening. And the last time I moderated with the John Adams Institute, I spoke with a renowned American historian, Jill Lepore. I now get to speak to a renowned American constitutional lawyer. And as a lawyer myself, of course, now I feel I'm much more on solid ground than last time. Our guest today is a professor of law at the University of Baltimore School of Law, where she teaches, among others, among many courses I saw, constitutional law, administrative law. But you might have also already seen Professor Wehle in Dutch media already a few times this week on television, in Newsyear, as well as in the Trouw newspaper. Talk about what's going on in the United States at the moment, but of course also about her book, Pardon Power, and both topics we will touch on today probably. And she is also no stranger to media, as I mentioned. On the contrary, next to her teaching and scholarly work, Professor Wehle is a very frequent contributor and analyst in American media on all the TV networks, as well as print and digital outlets such as Politico, The Atlantic, The Hill, and The Bulwark. So Professor Wehle's public profile is very notable. She's not, dare I say, your run-of-the-mill academic writing only obscure articles. No, Professor Wehle is in the public education business, I would argue. Her books have titles like How to Think Like a Lawyer and Why, What You Need to Know About Voting and Why, and How to Read the Constitution and Why. And I'd be remiss if I don't mention her Substack newsletter, Simple Politics with Kim Wehle, so subscribe, okay? I think Kim Wehle is a walking, talking public service when it comes to educating not only people in the United States, but over the world about constitutional law. But her latest book is Pardon Power, How the Pardon System Works, and we will talk about it today. It was published in 2024, and as Tracy mentioned, everything that Kim seems to fear and worry about in the book about pardons has probably come reality since publication. Perhaps we get to talk about that and other current legal constitutional issues that is keeping and myself very, very busy these days. And although she did tell me that she's quite content of being on this side of the Atlantic during this time. Me, on the other hand, I'm going to DC next week. And the other day at lunch, Kim assured me that she knows plenty of attorneys to help me just in case. You never know. But for now, please welcome Professor Kimberly Wehle.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you to Tracy and her husband, Baptiste, who have welcomed me to the Netherlands twice now, but with tremendously open arms. I'm so thrilled and delighted to be here. I cannot, of course, thank the Fulbright Commission more for choosing and selecting not just the work that Wim and I are doing with others at Leiden, but also to select this topic, which I think is becoming increasingly one that takes courage to embrace. And so, as Christopher was mentioning, this mission of the Fulbright in bridging the various cultures, the United States and other parts of the world in this moment, again, could not be more pressing, urgent, and really to be part of it is a privilege. I have 4 daughters, and part of why, as Kenneth mentioned, that I've become so passionate about public-facing civic education is because I care a lot about the future for them, which does depend, I think, on a vibrant democracy, which means rule of law by the people and preservation of individual liberties through some mechanism of accountability. So that's the thanks piece. There's also somebody else that I want to thank, a person by the name of George Washington. And the reason I want to thank George Washington is that he was the first president of the United States, but also the first to use the president's pardon power. There are other parts of the Constitution that have never been used and have become obsolete. So I guess in theory, had that not happened, maybe I wouldn't be here either if George hadn't engaged Article 2 of the Constitution, which is the part of the US Constitution that gives the President of the United States his job description. It tells the president, his or her, hopefully one day, what they can and they cannot do. And it's actually quite short, believe it or not. We are living in an era where it appears to be, and a lot of people understand, the President of the United States to have a tremendous amount of almost king-like power, and that actually is not the case. If you just look at the number of words in the Constitution, Congress is supposed to have a whole lot more. But George Washington issued the first set of pardons to people who participated in the Whiskey Rebellion in 1795. That uprising pitted the rebels who were upset about the first tax in the United States on distilled liquor against a guy by the name of Alexander Hamilton. You might have heard of him from a very well-known Broadway musical in the United States, but he was the first Secretary of State, and he was a big proponent of this tax because he believed distilled spirits were luxury items. And having spent now a few weeks drinking beer in the Netherlands, I must say he might have been onto something when he's talking about spirits being luxury items. But I'm often asked, as was mentioned, I've written now, this is the 4th book on civic education. If you notice, they all have the words "and why" in them. They're not how-to books, they're why-to books. And I believe, having taught for a long time, as I tell my students, if you understand the why, you can noodle yourself or analyze for yourself the what. You'll remember the law if you understand why we have the law. Why is there a law? Then you can remember what it might say. So why do we not have a monarchy in the United States? Which is, if you're a visual learner, it's like a pyramid where the power for the British monarch came from God. It was divinely endowed, and there the monarch had unlimited power. The American model flips it. It's an upside-down pyramid. The people are at the top, and the power trickles down to the president and to all people who exercise the power of the government in the United States. And so the pardon power actually, in a way, it seems a little bit like a strange corner of American law. It didn't get much attention until, as was mentioned, this last fall, frankly. It seems like an odd thing to write an entire book on, but it actually embodies 3 tensions that I think are central not just to the Constitution, but to American law and American society and even American history. The first is this idea of mercy in tension with corruption. As I'll talk about a little bit more, the pardon power, which dates back to the Code of Hammurabi, it goes, the beginning of time, really, is about mercy. The point of it is it's a stopgap. It's a mechanism to make sure people don't fall through the cracks in a criminal justice system, which can be harsh. It could put people in prison, take their liberty away, and even lead to their death in an execution, including right now in the United States. So that's the first tension. The second tension, as I indicated in my description of the triangles and the upside-down pyramids, is democracy on one hand, and something that looks like an unlimited monarchy. You could call it autocracy, authoritarianism, fascism, totalitarianism. Americans right now are debating all of those terms. What's the right term? It doesn't really matter. It's not my expertise. But the idea is, no, there was a war, a revolutionary war fought. A lot of people sacrificed. A lot of people passed away to not have that pyramid anymore. But the pardon power kind of does still have that whiff of an autocracy or an unlimited monarchy. Why? Because the framers took the king and broke it into 3 heads, the judicial branch, the executive branch, and the legislative branch. When the president pardons federal crimes, he overrides the legislative branch. Congress decides what's a crime. Congress sets forth the elements, overrides the judicial branch and our jury trial system. The judicial branch decides if an individual has violated the standards set forth by Congress. So with a pardon where there's no record required, there's no appeals, there's no justification required, the president does function as a king, wiping out the other 2 branches of government. So we're in that tension. And the last tension is between secular law, the rules, and religion, frankly. In ancient Rome, a prisoner who was on his way to the gallows, to the execution chamber, if the prisoner locked eyes with what was known as a Vestal Virgin was someone who took a 30-year vow of chastity and pledged to the goddess Vesta. And the idea was if you happened to be on your way to the death chamber and you looked into the eyes of the Vestal Virgin, her purity, her spiritual purity would wash over you and forgive you. Of course, the most famous pardon appears in the New Testament when Pontius Pilate, who was the 5th emperor to rule, governor to rule over Judea under the Roman Emperor Tiberius, he, on the Passover feast, traditionally would give the people the choice of pardoning one person. The choice was a guy by the name of Barabbas, who was being tried for murder and treason, and someone by the name of Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus of Nazareth was denied the pardon and was crucified, and of course it changed the face of civilization, and we live with that denial of a pardon to this day. But as I mentioned earlier, the reason for the pardon, the primary reason why there's a pardon, and it's in the American law, it's in some form in almost every country except China on the globe, is really about mercy, In the English legal system, it became on the scene in the 10th century under King Edmund, and at that time, most justice was actually handled by vendettas. You know, you kill my brother, I'm killing your brother. And the king stepped in and said, this isn't working anymore. I am actually the law, and so I will pardon. And the idea was to stop that cycle of violence, but of course, there was also some abuses by the kings historically, and the Enlightenment thinkers really debated what to do about the pardon power. There's a story, 1249, a 4-year-old girl named Catherine she pushed a door open, a child fell into a vat of water on the other side. There wasn't a criminal justice system there. There wasn't jury trials in England until the 13th century. So her father had to go to the king and get a pardon for this 4-year-old child so she could be spared the harsh reality of the criminal process. In theory, the mercy rationale is why it's in the American Constitution. The president shall have the power to grant reprieves and pardons, no definition of pardons, for offenses under the United States, not state offenses, only federal offenses, except in cases of impeachment. Not a lot of express limits. Abraham Lincoln really embraced the idea of the pardon power during the Civil War because the Union Army, the North, that was fighting to keep the country together and ultimately to eradicate enslaving people in the United States, had harsh punishments for offenses. So if you fell asleep on duty, you could have a very harsh result. And mothers and wives would petition Abraham Lincoln for pardons for their husbands and their sons. And it's something that gave him some respite from the trauma of what the soldiers were going through during the Civil War. He also pardoned Confederates after the war, as did his successor, Andrew Johnson. That is, the soldiers in the South that were fighting to split up the United States, he pardoned them. This is a traditional use of the pardon. It's called amnesty, to kind of bring the country together and move forward. Some people disagree with that decision, that it actually achieved that, but that's the theory. One story I stumbled upon that stands out for me, there's only one person who was a slave trader in American history by the name of Nathaniel Gordon, who actually was executed for his crimes as a slave trader. He sought a pardon from Lincoln. He was executed in 1862 and was denied the pardon. And years later, after Lincoln's death, a member of the Congress who had spoken to Lincoln privately about why he said no to Mr. Gordon's request for a pardon said that Lincoln explained, and I'm quoting John Alley, who was a member of Congress, he believed himself to be, quote, kindly enough in nature, said Lincoln, such that he could be moved to pity and to pardon the perpetrator of almost the worst crime that the mind of man can conceive of or the arm of man can execute. But he went on to say he will never pardon any person who, quote, for paltry gain and stimulated only by avarice or greed, can rob Africa of her children to sell into interminable bondage. That's not somebody that deserves a pardon in the mind of Abraham Lincoln. So we fast forward to 2024 and 2025 and the American presidents and some very controversial pardons from our last president and our current president. These aren't the first controversial pardons in American history, but they really ratcheted things up for the pardon. I may be okay for the book, I don't know. But of course, the last president pardoned his son. That was very controversial, not the first. Bill Clinton also pardoned his brother, family member, but pardoned 5 other members of his family in anticipation of what he believed would be vindictive prosecutions. But there was no idea, we have no idea what his family members supposedly might have done or were accused of. And so there's a problem with, basically wiping out the criminal justice system in advance that way. Constitution doesn't say anything one way or the other. Richard Nixon was pardoned by Gerald Ford that way. No indictment, it was ready to go. I've been on panels with John Dean. He wrote the foreword to my book. He was White House counsel under Nixon. The indictment was ready to go. So there is a piece of history that supports that idea, but now we've got precedent where presidents can just basically immunize people moving forward from any criminal scrutiny. And of course, on his first day in office, our current president pardoned approximately a little short of 1,600 people who participated in a violent insurrection at the United States Capitol on January 6, 2021. That was an attempt to use violence to wrest power from the legitimate winner of the 2020 election and to stop the peaceful transfer of power and the counting of the Electoral College votes. I'm asked a lot, I was asked before and after, is that a problem? Why is that a problem? And sometimes we forget. I remember sitting on my couch watching that event unfold. As I mentioned, I have 4 kids, and when they were little, I would push their strollers around the Capitol with my friends, it was so wonderful, the Smithsonian is free, you can wander in, spent so much time down there, and it was really very hard to watch that, and I think we forget that today, what a trauma that was. 5 police officers killed, more than 140 injured, some with serious brain damage and other injuries. And I just want to say, I know this is hard to hear, but some of these folks were caught on videotape brandishing stun guns, flagpoles, fire extinguishers, bike racks, batons, a metal whip, office furniture, bear spray, a tomahawk axe, a hockey stick, knuckle gloves, a baseball bat, a pitchfork, pieces of lumber, crutches, and even an explosive device. So the pardons underscored the idea that's been floating around for a while, that kind of activity, if it's done for the right politician, makes you a patriot. And if the criminal justice system catches up with you, it is holding you hostage. I think it's probably a far cry from our friend George Washington and our friend Abraham Lincoln. But I do think it's probably also fair to say that the framers, and including the pardon power in Article 2, tapped in to the best and the worst of humanity, of our instincts. Both of those, the pardon power, we see the sort of scales of justice, holds both. It's a means of showing extraordinary mercy. Presidents don't tend to use it in a really prominent way, for example, to address racism in our criminal justice system and other problems for a number of reasons, but it also can be used for extreme corruption, to pardon people who might be able to testify against you, for example, and hold you accountable. At the time, so there's three questions I think that are left with the pardon. Let me start there. The first question is, why do we have this in the American Constitution? If it's so bad and so susceptible to corruption, why is it even in there? Well, this is part of why I wrote the book. King George III, our friend from Hamilton, the musical, actually, Parliament had taken steps to restrain his power by the time the pardon made it into the U.S. Constitution. In 1328, a law called the Statute of Northampton constrained the king's power to pardon unless it was, quote, consistent with his oath to uphold justice and mercy in all judgments. Uphold justice and mercy. You could argue maybe that doesn't include corrupt reasons. Fast forward to last summer, 2024, June, the United States Supreme Court held that presidents can use the powers of the office to commit crimes, notwithstanding the fact that the job description requires faithful execution of the laws. Faithful execution of the laws, right now in America, means the commission of federal crimes. Somehow, that circle's being squared by our United States Supreme Court. And the problem with that decision is that, people within the chain of command are not covered by that immunity ruling, but they could be pardoned if they execute an illegal order. So you put the pardon together with the immunity ruling, and it's combustible frankly, in the hands of certain presidents who may or may not want to go in a direction that others would not. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is, then why do Americans accept this? It's in the Constitution. Why in 2024, 2025 are we accepting this? George W. Bush, the last Republican president, after his second term, was on record as saying he thought the pardon system caused a, quote, massive injustice because it's the people with connections and money and access and lobbyists and power that are at the top of the list in the last-minute frenzies for pardons, not necessarily those folks that are more disenfranchised, can't afford expensive lawyers, might not even be able to make bail. So they're serving their criminal sentence before they've even had one piece of evidence against them. It's a myth in the American legal lexicon that the people are innocent until proven guilty. In the United States, it's innocent until proven guilty unless you're poor. But the Constitution doesn't protect poverty. There's no constitutional protections for poverty. So I believe the reason we accept this is because people don't understand the power of the pardon. They don't understand it's not meant to be a king-like power. We can talk with Kenneth in the Q&A, how the Supreme Court actually has narrowed the pardon power before last summer, June. And when I talk to groups in the United States, I remind them of the Hamilton song, where the king sings a bunch of songs, and one is especially catchy. He says, "You'll be back, soon you'll see, you'll remember you belong to me. Oceans rise, empires fall, we have seen each other through it all. And when push comes to shove, I will send a fully armed battalion to remind you of my love." And if you're a singer, I have the singing mic on. It goes da 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 da. If you have any children, they will know every word of the Hamilton musical, particularly if you're American. My youngest, who's 15, knows that. So the last question is, on a brighter note, I think. I get this a lot. What can Americans do about all of this? How could this possibly be a brighter note? This has been such a downer of a talk. I get it. But I want to go back to our friend George Washington for this one. And this gets a little more personal for me and my philosophy around these things. A couple years ago, I was with my children in Virginia in one of George Washington's boyhood homes. And we were in the gift shop, and there was this little red book that was being sold in the gift shop that was written by George Washington when he was only 14 years old. It's called The 100 Rules of Civility. And you can read it really quickly. You could Google it. It's actually online in a PDF form. And I went through it and pulled out some answers to some really pressing questions. You know, and again, I do a lot of media, talking to people. I've had hundreds of students. These questions come up a lot, over and over and over again, not just since January 20th, but for years now. One would be, you know, what do you do about so much hate? Americans surveyed, if asked, both political parties, if someone from the opposing party is more immoral than someone from your party, supermajorities of Democrats and Republicans will say people from the other party are immoral, more immoral, not having met them. George Washington at age 14 said, quote, "Every action done in company ought to be with some sign of respect to those that are present." Translated, my 15-year-old, be kind. You can disagree, but you can be kind about it. Question number 2. Oh, so much misinformation, so much disinformation. When I was growing up in Buffalo in the 1970s, one of 6 kids, all of our information came from an encyclopedia that my mother got month after month at the grocery store. If she bought a certain amount of groceries, she'd get the next volume. So it was very hard to get good new information. You'd have to get in our station wagon, go to the library. It wasn't as beautiful as this in Buffalo, New York, and go through microfiche, pull out books to get more information. Now we're flooded with a lot of information into our computers in our hands, and an algorithm that we don't understand sorts that information based on what it believes we already believe. So everyone in this room gets different news, which is really a problem. What would George say about misinformation? He says, "Be not hasty to believe flying reports to the disparagement of any," meaning don't believe everything you read. We need, I think, for our children to learn how to sort information, not necessarily how to obtain information. And that sorting function is not something I think we've figured out yet, because the social media mechanism has happened so fast, and it's just happening even faster with artificial intelligence coming on the scene robustly in the next few years. Third question. Some of these, the pardon power, mercy, corruption, democracy, autocracy, rule of law, religion, these are hard problems. How do you grapple with such hard problems? He said, quote, "Labor to keep alive in your breast that little spark of celestial fire called conscience." I teach this to my children. You know, in the darkness, keep your integrity. People might be mad at you for your point of view, but if you take it with integrity, you will always find your way out of the woods. Washington also had a lot of tips about how to behave at a party when he was 14. I'm not sure this one stood the test of time. "Cleanse not your teeth with the tablecloth, napkin, fork, or knife, but if others do it, let it be done with a pick tooth." We call it toothpicks, but I guess it's okay if you pick your teeth in front of George Washington with a toothpick, but not with a napkin. Anyway, the last one I want to end on is, I think, apropos for this evening. He said, "Associate yourself with people of good quality if you esteem your own reputation, for 'tis better to be alone than in bad company." And we could not have better company tonight. I want to thank everyone for coming, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation, and encourage all of your questions, and thank you again for your attention.
Thank you so much, Kim. Thank you for the passion and the fire, which I can see is like the reason why you want to do this.
I'm often accused of that, yes.
Well, I would say it is a compliment.
Yeah.
But okay. That's why I see you're in the civic education business. I do want to go back a little bit to the book, of course, and ask you, at what moment did you think, well, wait a minute, there's something not right with this, with the pardon power. And you have a lot of examples in your book from the last couple of administrations. At what point did you think, well, wait a minute, because you asked the question, should we have the pardon power at all, which I think is a pretty big question. When did lightning hit?
To fast forward to the end of the book, I argue that we shouldn't have it. Once you sort of understand the premises that it's about mercy and that it's not functioning that way, that the same people who get a break when they're indicted, when they're arrested, when they're prosecuted, they're the same people that have access to a break in the pardon system, unless, famously, a woman by the name of Alice Marie Johnson denied a pardon by President Obama, got one under the first term of our current president, because Kim Kardashian found out about her story. So it really was researching and asking the why question. Why do we have it? Why do we have it? Is it serving the purposes? And then you get to this balancing where I'd say the corruption, the potential for corruption, in my mind, outweighs the benefits of certain people getting pardons. And the other thing, and the Enlightenment thinkers worried about this too, and there's Supreme Court case law on this, where with the pardon, you don't have to fix the system. And in a habeas corpus case, the Supreme Court basically held that even if you've got proof of innocence, that doesn't get you out of prison unless you have some other constitutional claim. Why? Because the president can always pardon you. Yeah.
Because you make a kind of a distinction, I feel like, especially towards the end of the book, about the problems with the pardon power being on the front end, saying, well, there's no fairness in the system, and then there's the corrupt part as well. So, but there are limitations. You talk about at length about the limitations that there are to the pardon power, except not for the actual decision of doing a pardon. But what kind of limitations are we talking about here?
Well, I just got an email right as I was sitting here from a reporter saying, if you have to forfeit assets as part of your criminal offense, can the pardon give you your money back, right? If the government took some of your money as part of your criminal sentence, the Supreme Court has held no, because it's Congress that has the power of the purse. Congress has to decide how to spend money. That's Congress's prerogative. That's one example. The Supreme Court has held that presidents cannot pardon crimes that have yet taken place. So back to the pardons from our last president, the idea would be if they haven't even occurred, if it happens 5 years from now, that wouldn't count. So then the question is, okay, well, what happened maybe with these family members that would have given rise to an indictment? So there's tinkering at the edges, but the point in the book is that the fact that the Supreme Court has limited the pardon power means it can be limited. And every other part of the Constitution is balanced. The commander-in-chief power, the take care clause, there are other parts of the Constitution, we balance them all. If a president were, I argue in the book, I don't know if that's the case now, a lot has changed since the book was published. If a president were to say, I'm going to pardon everyone in the federal system if you are Caucasian, I would argue, and I argue in the book, that would be, you'd have a claim that violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, that the Constitution has to be read as this hydraulic document as a whole, rather than pulling out one piece and saying, well, this is a king-like power. I just think that's wrong. But there aren't that many cases. There just aren't that many disputes about pardons. So we don't have a very robust set of case law precedent to really draw from.
I think there might be a perception for those who are a little bit more observant as to what's going on with the pardon, that they know about the existence of the Office of the Pardon Attorney, right? Can you describe perhaps a little bit how that process works? And because they get thousands of requests for pardons, only some of them come on the desk of the president.
Correct.
So what is the role exactly of the Office of the Pardon Attorney, and can it be bypassed?
They're advisors. So there's a handful of lawyers in the Department of Justice. There's an application online. You actually, under their criteria, have to have 5 years already passed since you finished your sentence. So The people, for example, that participated in January 6th, none of them would qualify under the DOJ guidelines because they have not finished their sentence and 5 years have not passed. So there are criteria. What struck me in the book, one of the criteria, notwithstanding that Supreme Court case I mentioned, is not in evidence of innocence. The application requires that you accept responsibility for your crime. So one of the problems in the federal criminal justice system in the United States, not the states, that's different, the federal, there really isn't a way to get out of jail. If you're in jail and you're innocent and you come up with new evidence, there's no parole in the federal system. Under Herrera versus Collins, you can't use habeas corpus. And even the pardon, that's not a criterion to get a pardon. But so the lawyers will read that, they'll look at your file. I think they want to talk to the prosecutors, which you would say could be, they're down the hall, they're DOJ. The DOJ prosecutors put them in jail, and then the DOJ prosecutors decide whether they should get a pardon. People say that's a bit of a conflict of interest. They will recommend these people to the president. Some presidents, I think, only went from that pile. In the early 20th century, I think presidents read them all the applications. Our criminal justice, the people in the criminal justice system has gone way up over the years. So there's just more people that need pardons. But no, it's not an act passed by Congress that the pardon attorney is part of the system. There's no requirement or mandate. And so our current president and the last president and the president before that, who's also our current president, all bypass that system to handpick people to be deserving of the massive mercy and outmaneuvering that a pardon happens with respect to the criminal justice system.
I want to pick on a little bit of what you said, because I was reading your book, and I wrote it down as one of my questions, that you argue, well, it's not really appropriate for the DOJ or for the executive branch to have sought prosecution of someone and later on having to think about, oh, well, maybe we shouldn't give that person a pardon. You feel that is inappropriate. You could also argue, perhaps, that it is actually appropriate for the executive branch because they get to correct their own mistake.
Yeah, it's a conflict of interest. I'm not sure I'm completely against it, but it's a conflict of interest, this idea that both decisions are housed within the same chain of command, within the same group of people. And other systems, including most states, there's only 5 or 6 states, including the District of Columbia, where the governor has the power that a president does. The rest of the states, which are most of the crimes in the United States, are state crimes, not federal crimes. There are, in other parts, there are commissions, or you might have a group of people, an expert in criminal justice, a formerly incarcerated person, a psychologist, a victim's rights person, a former judge. They would make that decision because these are difficult questions. That's why they go to juries. The idea is there's a big factual record, and it's hard to know within the Justice Department, within the policy of a sitting president, what the actual criteria are. There's no review. You can't appeal it. Under the Freedom of Information Act, presidents have taken the position that it's deliberative, so you cannot get the records of why someone did or did not issue a pardon. So it's kind of a black box, and it's okay so long as it doesn't really go off the rails, and I think it has a few times in American history.
Okay, so the question actually, the core question, I guess you could argue, it becomes, why did it go off the rails? You've talked about Hamilton, of course, and in the book you also mentioned what he wrote in the federal papers about the pardon. And there's this confidence or distrust, but also confidence in human nature somehow, that a wise person will use this power wisely, appropriately. Madison didn't trust anyone, didn't trust human nature. So are you basically conceding the fact that, well, human nature and people in power cannot be trusted, and no matter what system you have, including in the pardon power, it's not going to work?
I mean, Madison said, right, if men were angels, well, you didn't need government. And ambition needs to be made to counteract ambition. And our friend John Adams also said he anticipated that American democracy would end in self-murder because of too two parties fighting. Like if you only have two parties, inevitably it'll break down. So to answer your question, at the time of ratification of the Constitution, it wasn't a democracy. It was only white males who had wealth that could actually participate in elections. Vast majority of people could not. And these folks knew each other, right? Famously, in the case 1803, Marbury versus Madison, which established the Supreme Court's right to interpret the Constitution, it was a power grab by the Supreme Court. The Chief Justice Marshall, was the first Supreme Court justice, and he was the Secretary of State whose actions he was reviewing. He was John Adams' Secretary of State, and then he was Jefferson's, under Jefferson, he was the Supreme Court justice. So they kind of like, it was musical chairs. They kind of knew each other who was going to have this power. So I'm not can't go back in a time machine, but my guess was, if you kind of knew who was going to get it, we're probably comfortable with it. And of course, that's really changed. I mean, I agree with Madison that it's human nature, with no limits, if there's no constraints, no disincentives, to amass, entrench, and ultimately possibly abuse power. Famously, George Washington said, "No, I don't want to be a king." He was offered that. He rejected it. But for every George, there's going to be people that aren't like George. And so when I talk to non-lawyers, Americans, and the example that really sticks with people is when you're driving a car and there's a speed limit. And it's 35 and you go 50. You've gone 50 for 10 years. And then one day you come home and you open the mailbox and there's one of those awful tickets with a photo of your license plate, and it's $150 in Washington, D.C. Oh. Everyone will slow down on that street now that machine is hiding in the bushes. It's the consequences that get people to comply with the law, including presidents, not the law. The Constitution does not have arms and legs. It does not get out its gun and enforce itself. And presidents are human. So the problem with the pardon and the problem with other things right now, I think, in American democracy under the Constitution, is that the disincentives for blowing through the speed limits of the Constitution are gone. And then they're pretty much mostly gone. And then you're left with someone's own personal integrity. Our George Washington at 14, that some of us try to teach that to our children, that even if there's not a consequence, you still should just do it this way, because that's the way we do it in our family.
Yeah. Okay, so human nature is not to be trusted. But do you I mean, the perception that we always had of the pardon power is that it is a safety valve. But you're saying, okay, the safety valve doesn't really work. It has become much broader, right? Become used and abused. But I do think I want to push back a little bit and say, so what kind of good elements or aspects are there to a pardon power? I'm thinking of Lincoln and perhaps the Confederates after the Civil War. Would you be able to imagine, okay, don't get rid of the pardon power because it has XYZ purposes? Do you?
Well, I mean, some historians, and I'm not one, criticize Lincoln for doing that, because just like some people criticize the pardons around January 6th, because it's rewarding rebellion. And some believe that pardon was toxic and counterproductive. Our former president that left on January 20th pardoned people on death row. I happen to believe if we don't have a fail-safe system to make sure there's no innocent people on death row, that is a use of the pardon. I advocate for it in the book. I've advocated for it. Maybe Joe Biden was listening to me. I don't know. That to me would be a beneficial use of the pardon power, because we know then you're not using taxpayer dollars to execute someone who's innocent when there's not another mechanism in the criminal justice system to make sure that doesn't happen. It doesn't exist under the law. So like George Bush also said, he not only said he thought it was a problem, but he said every president who comes in should establish from day one what their pardon policy is. They should make that clear so that they could be held politically accountable. Even if there's no legal accountability, there's political accountability. If you say, listen, I'm like that statute from 14th century England only for if it's consistent with my oath of office, and if I don't do that, Harry Truman, the buck stops here. Jimmy Carter did a big pardoned people who dodged the Vietnam War draft, and some historians believe that cost him the election. You could say, whether you agreed with that pardon or not, there's accountability. He had to think about that. Likewise with Gerald Ford. Some people believe letting Nixon off the hook is why one of the reasons America is now in a moment where we have too much power in the presidency, and it's not just the current president. I mean, that sort of, packet of power is going to go to the next person and the next person. And some believe that Ford lost re-election because of making that controversial decision, which, by the way, inside baseball here, people think he did it to heal the nation. According to my friend John Dean, I was on a panel with him at the University of Michigan last fall on this very topic, because Gerald Ford is the namesake of the business school at the University of Michigan. He said, no. He pardoned Nixon because he didn't want to have to deal with the trial. He didn't want to have to testify. He didn't want to have his lawyers in the White House have to be answering subpoenas, all that stuff. It was a very pragmatic decision. It wasn't this lofty idea of healing the nation. But again, to me, that's less problematic because there's political accountability. But that was back when we didn't have phones. I was also in the BBC green room a few years ago with one of the first members of the Republicans in Congress who went to tell Nixon, your time is over, you gotta leave. He was never indicted, he wasn't actually impeached. It's just that the pressure from the public shifted, and this member of Congress said it's because of the Washington Post, CBS News, 60 Minutes, everybody got the same set of facts, everybody could make a decision based on actual evidence, and they had lost the American public. So then the Republican Party had to go to him and say, we've got to go with the voters. That's not possible now, given how our news cycle.
Okay. So, but then, because we're getting a little bit towards the total current situation in the U.S., isn't the fact that we now have, for instance, a Congress that is not very responsive to any concerns about what the current president is doing, that an unlimited power of pardon in the president becomes all the more problematic, right? So, just so I can see your point there, but I'm trying to see how I can delicately ask this more about the because having the power of the pardon in the current president in this political constellation that we have, how would you view this current environment in constitutional terms? Not only the pardon power that we saw on January 20th, including what President Biden did before, because I get this question a lot. How should we assess the current constitutional system, how it's working, and what kind of challenges it's facing right now?
Well, I just go back to my speed limit analogy. In 2022, in the spring of 2022, I did a thought experiment with my constitutional law students, where I put on the board, we went through the Constitution and listed all the tickets for speeding, impeachment, with appropriations, withholding funding, congressional investigations, 25th Amendment, for incompetence or whatever. We went through all of them and looked back historically where we were at that point. Is there tickets for speeding by any of the other two branches? And we crossed pretty much everything off, except for the threat of a criminal indictment. That if you think you're going to go to jail, if you do something, you might not do it. And the Supreme Court last summer in 2024 took that off the table as well. So I think we're seeing an environment where we have the Constitution on paper and we have branches that are positioned to issue tickets for speeding. we have lower federal judges who are doing it, but we have members of the House of, of Congress that are now are introducing articles of impeachment to fire those judges for issuing the tickets for speeding. So it really is, I mean, I'm a mom, if you've got the don't eat, you can't eat in the living room except on the Super Bowl day, your 5-year-old is going to eat in the living room every single day because there's the one time you don't enforce the rule, right? It's no different with the Constitution. So I've been saying for a long time, and this has now become a difficult word, or phrase, that we are in a constitutional crisis. We've been in a constitutional crisis for a long time. I think now we're just seeing what is coming, what it looks like. But the crisis started a while ago because, the Constitution wasn't being enforced. So like the poor little Constitution needs mom to, come down and, and start putting some people in timeouts or whatever they do over here. We're not allowed to do that in the United States anymore, but.
I get my kids to go like, Dad, I can't do this because Mom said I can't.
Divide and conquer?
Will you allow me? Yeah, exactly. Another question. Well, you already talked about constitutional crisis, and I'm a little bit surprised that you all already say, well, this is a constitutional crisis. Okay, let's say that we're in a constitutional crisis. What is the tipping point for you in the next couple of months that you would say, well, there is no turning back here, or there is a complete breakdown of the Constitution?
I mean, I think we're past it, personally. I really do.
Okay.
And so I say because people will say, well, we're going to have midterm elections, but, we had a split Congress the last 4 years, and that didn't stave off this moment. So even if we have a split Congress or both houses go to the Democrats, I don't see that somehow as getting those, the forces back. People will say, well, the Supreme Court hasn't ruled on things. We have the Supreme Court. Some of the things that are happening right now are not in that ambiguous zone of, well, lawyers could argue both sides. We're having direct, I will not comply with the Constitution. And I have a column actually coming out soon, on this topic. I don't think we need the Supreme Court, which is created by the Constitution, to get out a black marker or a highlighter and read the words. I mean, it's there. So if it's not going to be respected, the Supreme Court coming in and saying, yeah, we really mean it. It really means what it says. It's a valid document. It's a valid source of law. I don't think we need that. And there's even a danger with this particular Supreme Court that they will say, they'll reinterpret some of those checks and balances. So those are kind of the two things people are hoping are going to all of a sudden turn the ship around. I think what could make a difference is where, a lot of Americans realize how serious this is. And some of us have been doing this for many years, and it's hard for people to hear, and so they don't want to hear it or change the topic. It won't happen. The things I'm looking for, frankly, are some high-profile arrests and prosecutions, members of the media. I'm not saying this will happen, but if these are the things that are pricking up that's one thing I don't, I hope it doesn't happen, but that would be, I think, a potential line. And I assume it would be without necessarily evidence. I did a big column in Politico on all the law of this. On this, it's very hard to fight back trumped up charges. I don't, no pun intended, but it's very hard legally. There's really no legal mechanism to stop a prosecution that is vindictive with no evidence under American law, because the courts never had to deal with that. So we never developed it. American law is premised on the idea that prosecutors act in good faith. And I've read all the cases for this piece that I wrote. And now if that dynamic shifts, we just don't have laws in place to deal with that. That's number one. The second would be violence around protests. There's some concern. I have college-age daughters and of course there was someone that was arrested from Columbia University for taking a point of view that is antithetical to certain people in politics right now, who is now sitting in prison, no habeas relief, no charges brought against this person legally in the country. So I think if some more of that starts happening and we see the use of the military on civilians, to me that's another potential tipping point where people will say, wow, maybe this is a new day. I don't know. Those are the two things that.
So it's not a question of waiting until the Supreme Court rules against the current administration and the current administration just ignores it. I mean, you're saying we're already beyond.
Well, birthright citizenship, 4 judges have already said, it says birthright citizenship.
Yeah.
We have 4 judges. They haven't changed their position on that. So that to me is, we don't need the Supreme Court to say the words say birthright citizenship. I mean, that's there. So, so I just don't see the Supreme Court as coming to the rescue, where all of a sudden someone's going to say, "Oh, now I can read. I couldn't read last week." I don't think that's I don't think that's going to happen.
Maybe I should stop writing that book about the Supreme Court that I was doing. But okay, we always want to end a little bit on a positive note before we go on the questions. What does give you hope when we see all these challenges, and how can these challenges be met in a positive way without fundamentally changing America?
It's focusing on what brings us together. It's focusing on our common humanity. I really believe Americans, when it's stripped away, the ideology is stripped away, we're the same. We care about the same things. I was in a car from Disney World a few years ago going to the airport, and the Uber driver with my children in the car could tell like this that I didn't support a particular, it was 2 presidents ago, and we got to the airport and he wanted to give me free scuba lessons. He wanted to make sure that by the time I got to New York, I would call him. And he goes, "Lady, I was going to pull over and kick you out of the car." And my kids said, "Mom, that was scary. How does he like you so much?" And what we did, we talked about value systems. I said, we talked about, okay, if you've got to make a hard decision in your life, do you call your politician? Do you call your senator? No, you call your mom, you call your best friend. And we sort of, we got together on that. And then we had this common thing. He and I were together. And so that I really do believe in. And the other piece is young people. I mean, I teach thousands of young people at this point in their 20s. They really want to make things, they want some guidance. They're very motivated. They're so smart. Right now, they don't really know which direction to turn. So I think if older generations can help guide with showing some leadership, modeling some of this integrity, that is, and I say to my students, the moment will come. Your moment will come. It's not now, but what our job is now is to prepare you when that moment comes to step into the light and to bring us to the other side. So they really, really do. Okay. My children and my students really do give me.
So young people, I would say connect with other people and speak, and then we'll get there. Right?
Yeah.
And so with that, first of all, can I get a hand for Kim Wehle? Thank you. So now it's your turn. If you have questions, please raise your hand. I'm going to try, and I'm not going to throw it. I'm going to walk to you.
There are lawyers in the house. No
throw
worries.
it gently. Here you go.
There's a microphone in here?
Yes, the black piece.
Thank you for a very interesting talk. Related, I think, to pardon is immunity, because it's a type of pardon.
Yeah.
Trump was indicted, I think, 93 times, and Stormy Daniels was certainly the least of his crimes when you think about trying to overturn an election and leading a bloody insurrection. What actually is stopping people from prosecuting now? Why should somebody be immune? And what is actually the constitutional justification for that?
Okay, so there's a lot in there. I mean, what's stopping, of course, is his attorney general answers to him, so there'd be no federal prosecution of a sitting president. It's his, he's at the top of the Justice Department. States, and then the Georgia case has not been dismissed, so the states could prosecute if they've got grounds for actions that took place in that state, right? So it's bound by the jurisdiction of the state. So, California couldn't bring an indictment about January 6th, presumably, and because that happened in Washington. So the indictment was brought in Washington. I think in this moment, there's fear in the United States. There's fear, politicians, media people, academics, of retaliation. And so we're already feeling a chill, and there were threats against judges, threats against prosecutors, threats against judges' families. So I think there's that piece that's potentially also just a disincentive to do this. But really, it's the opinion itself at the end of the day. I've participated, as Kenneth mentioned, in a lot of media, and the media kind of took the bait in the majority opinion and said, oh, well, not all crimes are immune. Only those using official power, not the unofficial power. I personally am not sitting around worrying that a president's going to, pull out his boyhood rifle and shoot someone on the way to the men's room, right? And even if the men's room was in the White House, that would probably be official power. My point is, official power is so massive, and it's that stuff that's concerning. It's the use of the military, the FBI, the CIA. That's the scary stuff that we do need tickets for speeding. We do need, I know there's the thing in the bushes, I better go 35. I can speed once I get past the stop sign, but literally in Washington, you'll see it. They'll put one of those, and then everyone goes really slow, and then they go fast. It's like literally. So I don't think any prosecutor would make it even, first of all, you couldn't do it with a sitting president, period. I think even before the immunity decision, no one's going to indict a sitting president. But if you fast forward, the current president is no longer president at some point. I think when you read that, they know they'll lose. No prosecutor could make any case, so they're not going to even try for no other, because it would lose under the law, but also there'd be so much political backlash. Why would you try if you have a 1% chance of getting through the various hoops that the Supreme Court layered? It's a very layered opinion. It's too detailed for people, probably. There's multiple steps that prosecutors have to show. It's not just one thing. To be able to make it an unofficial act, there's layers of arguments and proof that you have to have. They've made it virtually impossible. I think impossible.
Okay. Next question. I think behind you, yeah.
Thank you, Kim. You mentioned that there are several ways the Constitution already has been broken and brought it into a constitutional crisis. One of the things I was wondering, that in the Constitution that the president can only run for 2 terms. If Trump does decide to go for third term, are there any speed breaks, tickets to stop him? Is there any power in there, or is he free to do so if he really chooses to do so?
Yeah, so the 22nd Amendment says that there only 2 terms, which is 8, and that was after FDR, was elected 4 times, and the concern was, that's Franklin Delano Roosevelt, that we don't want the presidency turning, into an imperialist family. That 22nd Amendment also says that if you're vice president and the president, God forbid, is sick or dies or something in office and you become president, that the maximum you could serve is 10 years. So it's really the maximum is 10, not 8, if the last 2 years are because you served 2 years as a vice president who then became president and it was under 2 years. It gets a little bit complicated. Lawyers are creative. There are creative arguments swirling around that I think are wrong, that the 22nd Amendment could be construed to allow more than 10 years. If you were vice president on the ticket, the president who fake ran as president steps down, and you then became president, that you could stay. I don't think that's a good argument. But again, who's going to stop that? That's really the issue. In the United States, there's not a national way of getting on the ballot. You have to get on every state's ballot separately based on that state's rules. So in California, for example, if you want to be added to the presidential ballot, you've got to get like 60,000 signatures to be added under California law. So if someone were to say, I don't care about the 22nd Amendment, I'm gonna just get on the ballot anyway, and say it was a Democrat, the Democratic Party allowed that, say Barack Obama decides he wants a third term, the Democratic Party in a lot of states decides how you get on the ballot, and they say it's okay with us, and that person gets elected, and then someone challenges that as inconsistent with the 22nd Amendment, I think it's over, right? Like, so it's one of those, people like to think, oh, we have that there, but if it's not enforceable, it doesn't really matter. So long story short, I think if there was an appetite for that, it's possible that could happen, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm afraid of the time we have one more question. And I'm going to decide who.
You're the boss.
I'm the boss. I'm looking for younger people over there. Oh, here we go. with all due respect.
Yeah, of course.
Oh, over there. I'm sorry, she was first. And I get to throw the thing, so.
If you want more, sign up for my Substack. I break this stuff down twice a week. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Elise, I'm a student, and I am currently looking into tools to fight rhetoric, populist rhetoric. So I'm very interested in what you do, and thank you for your work and your presentation and your book. It's very useful at the moment, and a lot of what you said has made me think of something I'm reading at the moment, which is On Tyranny by Timothy Snyder, and it has a lot of the tools that you mentioned. And I was just wondering, when you mentioned Washington's part on maybe now the information that we have and our responsibility to look further into what it is, I don't know if that is entirely fair, because I feel like some people, because of the system we're in, capitalism, they have to constantly produce.
Do you have a question? Can you make it a question?
Yes, they are overworked, so it is maybe not fair to put the responsibility on those people who don't have the chance to be able to look into it, or don't have the time or energy for it. So I was wondering if there are maybe ways to fight within the institutions when we are aware of it, instead of putting the responsibility of people who cannot afford to look further into information.
So is the question,
How to fight within the institutions?
fight within the institution with social media? Is that what you mean in particular? Getting information?
Any ways that you think of that tools can help fight within institutions populist rhetoric?
Well, I think it's people have to take responsibility for their government. So I do think it's up to everybody to take the responsibility for themselves. If you went to the doctor and the doctor felt a lump here, it's your responsibility to follow up. Ignoring it is not going to make it go away. It's going to make it worse. And I think that's why partly we are where we are, is because people just didn't want to look at the lump or talk about the lump or go back to the doctor about the lump, and it got bigger and bigger and more toxic and cancerous, right? So, I think education is really crucial. So if you learn something from this conversation, tell someone what you learned. And as Kenneth said, when you have that conversation, this is my third book, How to Think Like a Lawyer and Why, it really breaks down how do you have that conversation without getting into an argument, right? Lawyers have to understand the opponent's best argument. You have to. You can't go into court only knowing your side, or you will lose. Imagine if we had a conversation, every political conversation we had, we went with this energy that I'm assuming the person I'm talking to is smart, thoughtful, and I'm going to try to imagine their best argument for what they're saying. I think it'd be a very different sort of environment that we're having political conversations. Also, lawyers have to they have to understand they're not going to always win, right? You could have the best case and all the evidence, and you still lose. And you've got to tell your client that, or you might settle. And if you settle, it might be in a way that's unfair. Lawyers understand winning doesn't mean 100% winning. Imagine if when we talked about politics, we understood we have to compromise and we're both going to walk away with not everything we want, but we will we will get things that we all care about to hold. And that gets to another thing with lawyers. Lawyers have to think about their values, the value system. Why do we have the pardon power? I talked about it, mercy. Why do we ban killing? Because we value life. Why do we have speed limits, stop signs? Because we value safety. Maybe not with bikes in Amsterdam, sorry, but
There are no rules.
but if we, if you understood that we're operating from a common value system here, the rule of law, liberty, frankly, I just don't like a bullying government. I don't care who's in the government. I don't want government bossing me around. I don't want to worry about being able to post something or have this conversation that I'm going to get a knock at the door or a phone call or something in the mail or a big lawsuit that I can't afford to defend, right? So if we can come and you say, well, we're compromising, but what we win is this thing that we really care about, the value system. We have that together. Lawyers do that. And imagine if we led from our value system and not from our camps, team blue, team red. And I'll end with one other analogy I like to use, where I think of the Constitution as a bridge over a rushing, treacherous river, and it's almost 250 years old. And, at the time the bridge was built, there were no red police officers and blue police officers. There wasn't any political parties in the Constitution, but it got to the point where it was either red police officers that were directing traffic or blue uniformed police officers. And then people in the blue and the red cars started associating with the officers. So they started hating each other. And it was all who gets to direct the traffic. Meanwhile, this bridge, the water is wearing out the grouting in the bridge, right? It's wearing down. No one's paying attention to the bridge. And I ask people in the United States, when the bridge falls, who survives? The people in the red cars or the people in the blue cars? Who stays suspended in air like Looney Tunes, the coyote? No one does. We all fall. And I think if people can see it differently, but to your question, I don't know what to do about social media.
What you mentioned is very linked to deep canvassing, which is a theory about people talking to trusted individuals and how we can change their beliefs. And I truly believe that that's one of the main things, that individuals to individuals, not representing
It's connecting.
our party,
Yeah.
is what leads true change.
Yeah.
Thank you. No, I agree with that. I agree with that. And I do think young people know their way around the social media a lot better than we do. So I trust them on that.
Thank you. Kimberly Wehle, please. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Speaking of young people, this part of our evening is all about young people and our essay contest, Beyond Academia. I would like to hand over the floor to my colleague, Sean Cotter-Lem, who is our coordinator of outreach, and together with our guests, our friends from the Roosevelt Institute of Advanced Studies in Middelburg, Gaetano Di Tommaso and Dario Fuzzi. That doesn't sound very American. They will tell us about the prize and tell us who won. The floor is yours, Sean.
Sorry. Wow. Okay. Yeah. It's amazing to be here. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Tracy. Thanks a lot. This was fantastic. My name is Dario. I'm a professor of U.S. history at Leiden University and at the Roosevelt Institute for American Studies, and I'm a supporter of the Y team. I have a couple of students here today in the room, and they know how much I care about, inviting them to always try to understand why something happened. The reasons, the purposes, the motivations, and this is what keeps a system of values together eventually. A critical understanding is what we are trying to cultivate in our universities, in our institutions, that precisely because of these important social reasons and role that they play are under attack everywhere where the system of social values is undermined by political will. And we do this as a part of a shared mission with the John Adams Institute at the Roosevelt Institute for American Studies, where we try to invite young minds here in the Netherlands to think critically about the United States. And the idea that was born within the John Adams Institute was to award this critical thinking once a year by presenting this prize to essays that have been explaining us why something has been happening in the United States in innovative, original ways, and in ways that could reach out well beyond academia. That is something that we really need to do, to create bridges, to value them, and to maintain them, and to use the energies and original views of young generations in order to make this bridge work perhaps in the future too. So together with the colleagues at the John Adams Institute, we select papers, the best papers written about American history, culture, and politics in the Netherlands that could really build bridges between academia and the general public. And we have here in the public the three finalists, the shortlisted, the authors of the shortlisted papers. I'm going to mention them very quickly because they deserve, I think, our attention and also our praise. The first one is Emma Riquet from Leiden University, whose paper was titled "Take It Down, the Confederate Flag After the Shooting at Mother Emanuel." And it's an essay very much in line with the topics we were talking about the historical, political, and social dimensions of removing the Confederate flag from South Carolina State House grounds following the 2015 Charleston church shooting. And this essay is very important because it allows us to better understand the historical and political role of symbols, their polarizing roles, and also the public uses of history. Right? While you were talking, I was thinking about, FDR threatening the Supreme Court to jump back it. I mean, I teach a course that is called Democracy in Action, that is about the movement of American democracy, and I really think that this essay allows us also to understand the many ways, sometimes conflictual and controversial, in which American democracy evolves. The second one is Kirsten Soers, also from Leiden University, whose essay was titled "Heeding the Local Women's Warning, Expansive Subalternity in Christiana Kahakawila, This is Paradise." This essay uses the short story "This is Paradise," which spotlights the voices of local women from Hawaii as critical interpreters of dangers, memory, and power, to demonstrate how overlooked voices can often offer crucial insights into systemic issues of imbalances of power. It's sometimes, most of the times, perhaps the story of the losers, the excluded, the one that seems to be put aside and on the margins of American society that will, in the end, transform America. So this essay helps us to have optimism in the future. And the third finalist was Elisabeth Hoekstra from the University of Amsterdam, whose essay was titled "Sourdough Bread and A-Line Dresses, How Implicit Tradwives Communicate Far-Right Ideologies." Again, very much topical and very much in line with the topic of tonight. This essay tackles the role and the stories of US women who showcase traditional domestic lifestyles online to promote all alt-right ideologies. Implicit tradwives, that is, women who support political ideologies even without making any explicit political statement or political commitment, represent diverse subcultures from rural America to 1980s concerned housewives. And they have helped in the last few years to introduce extremist ideas through seemingly apolitical content like homemaking, fashion, and domestic routines. And again, this essay allows us to better understand the dynamics that are affecting American societies, the reasons why we have constitutional crisis. So, as a jury, we discuss these papers, we have meetings, we drink coffees together, we keep talking, we have phone calls, messages, and it's a long process eventually because we want to make sure that we give the prize to the best person. And what guides our deliberation is usually, the very scope, the purpose of the essay, to go beyond academia and to reach out to broader audiences. And for this reason, we decided to give the award to the essay that better allows us to understand through new cultures, even visual materials, the ways in which American societies is evolving today. So for this reason, the prize goes to, here, there should be suspense, to Elisabeth Hoekstrom from the University of Amsterdam. Congratulations. Now, I know I've been told that Elisabeth couldn't make it today, so she's not with us, but we have a video, right? So, I mean, talking about visual cultures. So, Sean?
Hi, everyone. I'm honored to be chosen as this year's winner of the Beyond Academia Thesis Contest. Writing this thesis has been the highlight of my academic career, as well as the biggest challenge, both academically and mentally. Immersing myself in the world of thread culture could at times feel pretty overwhelming, especially since there was no escaping it, as my Instagram algorithm became completely flooded by threadwise and other far-right content creators. I get to experience firsthand the undeniable power of online visual content, which was both scary and uncomfortable, as well as incredibly insightful. Understanding the role social media play in the growing global far-right community is as important as ever, especially in light of President Trump's recent re-election. My thesis offers just the tiniest contribution to this fast-growing field of research, and I hope to continue dedicating myself to exploring this topic. Thank you.
We have the parents of Elisabeth who will take the word. Tracy?
And a check from the John Adams Institute as a year's membership.
Yeah. Well, thank you on behalf of my daughter.
Elizabeth is in Japan.
She is, yes, and not even in America, though.
Yeah.
And the travel was already booked before we heard about this event. She's sorry if she couldn't make it. But thank you on behalf of her, and I hope the prize will continue, because I can imagine for the whole community here as well. It's tension time, is that the word? Tension in the air.
Yes. Uncertain times.
Uncertain times, that's the kind. So thank you very much.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I would also like to give a hand of applause to Emma and Kristen. If you can stand up, this is for you. It's a great thing.
Well, this evening is about many things and many crises, but it's also about the joy of collaboration. We have been so lucky to work together with so many like-minded institutions, the Fulbright Commission, the Roosevelt Institute of American Studies, the University of Leiden. That's one of the wonderful things that the John Adams Institute brings us, and I hope to you too. One of the things that I heard from Kim this evening that will really stick with me and that I found even more worrisome than these already so turbulent times is that this crisis already started a while ago. Where was I? Why did I not realize this? Why didn't I see this coming? And I think the crisis in the US, or the events in the US now, are getting a lot of people thinking about, where did this come from? This didn't just drop out of the sky. This has been a long time in the making. We've got to start paying attention, is basically what I'm saying. At least that's my lesson for myself from this evening. So I'd like to mention a couple of our upcoming events before I take us outside. Hopefully, Sean, are there drinks?
There's a bar.
Oh, thank heavens. There's a bar.
Not an open bar, there's a bar.
Important difference, yeah. Yeah. We have a couple events coming up that I'm really looking forward to, if only because I'm the moderator of the next one. That's on March 24th. We have the MIT and Wharton School of Economics professor R. Jinsung Park, coming to talk about his book Slow Burn, about climate change and about, well, he hopes that once we understand what the problem really is, that that will empower us to act and that there will be a solution for climate change. I hope he's right. And I'm doing that conversation together with Wouter van Noort of NRC Handelsblad. I think that should be a lively conversation. On April 3rd, my predecessor at the John Adams as director, Russell Shorto, is coming back to the Netherlands to talk about his book, Taking Manhattan. And I thought it was interesting that Dario Fazzi mentioned the voices of those who were excluded. That is exactly what Russell's new book is about. It's about the people who were taken to the US by the Dutch as slaves, the lives that women led there, the Native Americans who of course already inhabited that place before the Dutch came as and discovered it. So I think this should be a wonderful evening. Actual live tickets are sold out, but there are still tickets for the live stream. And on May 8th, Curtis Chin, a completely different kind of author. Everything I learned in a Chinese restaurant. Curtis is the son of Chinese restaurant owners in Detroit of the 1980s. So it's about ethnicity, about the life that his parents led. It's about Detroit in the 80s, which of course was a rather dire place. I think that should also be fun and interesting in a different way from all the other events. Thank you all for coming. Thanks to our wonderful friends from the Public Library, Technique, Simon, who allow us to use this space. And thanks to our moderator of this evening, Kenneth Manusama, and especially to our thinker in residence, Kim Wehle.